all dropped in one day. So this went really under the radar. And since there's not a lot of straight up Rob Van Dam documentaries out there, this one was tremendous, right? This one was really good because you don't get a lot of WWE did a documentary on Rob before. Not a full documentary. It was basically like they put out a DVD set and he got to explain some things that he, about the matches that you were about to watch or about his run in ECW. But this was cohesive. This was about Rob, Rob the man. And you see from this story that one of Rob's things from the beginning has always been maintaining who he is. He had a steadfast belief and understanding in who he is and who he wanted to be. And even if it tanked his career, he was not going to be anybody except who he wanted to be. And, there was a couple of times where people tried to get him to do things. And that's how he ended up with the name Rob Van Dam. We'll talk about that in a moment. But for most of the thing was Rob being stubborn. Him saying, nope, this is what I want to do. I'm going to do this. And I'm not going to, if it doesn't work out, so be it. At least I made my own decisions. And they talked a lot about all of the usual things. ECW talked extensively about that. The ECW rebranding, him getting arrested, his divorce. They talked about that type of stuff too. But, there was a lot in here. And it was very stylistically very well done. It was a great documentary. So let's finally, after 2 minutes of preamble, let's get into what this thing was about. So his mom was in the documentary. She talked about how he loved jumping off things. Really big on the diving boards. He liked to jump off things. He liked to show off. Essentially, he was who Rob Van Dam is, even as a little kid. And it was interesting that he wasn't really much of a wrestling fan growing up, but he was as much of enough of a fan to have seen Ted DiBiase. So obviously the infamous video is out there of him kissing Ted DiBiase's foot for $100. He told the story that you were really supposed to negotiate with Ted, but he didn't. Of course, he didn't know that. I forget how old he was. I think he was like 12 or 14 or something like that when this happened. So he basically did it for $100. He said this is the first money he ever won in the business. And in 1989, he decided he wanted to be a wrestler, and he was looking around at him and his buddies finally found a ring. And they found a ring at the guy named Kit Likens. Kit Likens is a karate fighter and a kickboxer. And he was in the documentary, and he said basically they wanted to use the ring. But he was teaching a karate class and he needed the ring. But he said, if you guys take karate, then you can do whatever you wanted after the class. So they had karate. This was where Rob Van Dam started doing his martial arts and his character. He did these things with Kit Likens, and then afterwards they would try wrestling. And from this, Rob would also get into kickboxing competitions. Now this was truly wonderful stuff, where we got to see Rob kickbox. And basically, they had showed some footage of him fighting. And they said he was like, he was a kid. And he might have been 14 or 15 years old. And he was having amateur fights with full-grown adult men and doing okay, and not embarrassing himself. And Kit Likens was very disappointed because Rob, again, was being very stubborn. And even though Kit was telling him, like, look, you're pretty good at this kickboxing thing. You should probably stick with it. And Rob was like, nah, I want to be a wrestler. And just kind of dropped it. And he just said, forget it. I'm doing this. So he met a power lifter. They say he was bagging groceries or something like that. And the power lifter was being trained by Sheik Farhat. For those of you who don't know, they call him the original Sheik. But they really don't like you calling him the original Sheik because they don't like to recognize the Iron Sheik at all. So Sheik Farhat, or the original Sheik, or the Sheik, was the trainer for this power lifter who wanted to be a wrestler. And Rob basically talked to him. And he went down to Detroit, because he's from Battle Creek. He went down to Detroit to train in the gym. And that's where he met Sabu. And then Sabu was in the documentary. He says that was Sabu. He taught me how to do a backflip, but I taught him everything else. And that was great. And the Sheik had one mission when it comes to these guys, to protect the business. So he didn't smarten them up at all. He didn't teach them how to fall. He didn't teach them how to throw a punch. Didn't teach them how to throw a kick. Nothing. So they worked very snug, Sabu and Rob Van Dam. And that would, of course, become a problem later in his career, that how snug they worked. But they were taught to protect the business, you know, to lay their shit in. You know, Sheik was bleeding every fucking week. You know, these guys were not, he was not playing around. Anyway, he got his first real gig in Florida in 91, 92. And this is where he gets the name Rob Van Dam, because they say, oh yeah, you look just like that actor, Jean-Claude Van Damme. And they had him speaking with a accent, like he was from Belgium, because that's where Jean-Claude Van Damme is from. And he was supposed to be his cousin or his nephew or something like that. So he would have to go out there and speak with that silly accent. And basically, you know, Rob was kind of like, whatever. You know, the name stuck, the accent didn't. And then, of course, he went to Jamaica on a trip with Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey of the Heavenly Bodies, a bunch of other guys. And this is where he was introduced to weed. He was introduced to the ganja. And he said he didn't want to do it, but, you know, once they introduced it, he said he didn't really even enjoy it. But later on, he will remember, you know, the way he felt after he did it. And so that was very interesting. So they actually talked about him going to Japan, and basically going to All Japan in 1993, where he was becoming sort of an international star. And that kind of was the launching pad for him going to WCW the short time he was there. He was talked about how, you know, he was doing okay in WCW, but it was only about 5 months, and they wanted him to sign a contract. He refused to sign it. He kept, you know, coming up with excuses to why he wouldn't sign it. And then he says that somebody, it was in 1993, who would it have been? Would it have been Bill Watts, maybe? Basically says, like, what are you going to do? You know, run the independents? And basically, Rob Van Dam was basically like, I do what I want, you know. I don't want to work in WCW. So he didn't. He didn't want to work in WCW, so he didn't. And then he left, and he did independence, and he did Japan. And then he went to the National Wrestling Conference, which is a wrestling promotion I did not even know existed. I had never even heard of this place, so I actually looked it up. And because when I looked it up, I found an article. I'll put it in the description if I can remember. And the promotion was a Northwest wrestling promotion, and it was actually, you know, they run obviously as wrestling promotions do. A lot of old timers, guys who were a little over the hill or not currently signed, big names that were not currently signed, so like Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Jim the Anvil Neidhart. But the interesting thing is that the promotion ended up being co-owned by the Ultimate Warrior. So Rob Van Dam worked there for a short amount of time, but National Wrestling Conference was a promotion that Warrior actually bought into, because, you know, he was on the outs with WWE, and they were going through the whole thing about his name, or whether he could call himself Ultimate Warrior or The Warrior. And basically he had such a high price that he was able to get into the company as an owner, and he ruined it, of course, because nobody ever heard of it. But that's a very interesting place, and they had some footage of him there with Bobby Bradley as aerial assault. And he ended up getting that gig because of Sabu as well. So Sabu basically was, you know, going to places and then telling Rob, hey, you should come here. And that's essentially what happened with ECW. And that he went to ECW, and then he told Rob, hey, you should come in. And Sabu said in the documentary, hey, I just wanted to work a feud with him. I didn't expect him to stay around. And he did. And they worked the short feud, and then Paul signed him, because Paul was a fan of, you know, his work in All Japan, because Paul watches everything. That's just kind of how he is. And he kept Rob Van Dam around, and that's, you know, where we get ye old RVD that we know today. So they talked about the barely legal situation, about Rob Van Dam not being booked for that show. And Paul says, we didn't know if Rob was going to stay, because Rob not only had a penchant for leaving when, you know, he just felt like leaving, but he had also gotten a pretty hefty contract from Eric Bischoff, and they thought he was going to jump ship to WCW. And Rob said, look, even though the money was more for WCW, I was more interested in the creative freedom. And ECW allowed far more creative freedom. So my plan was to stay, but I was offended when they did not book me for Barely Legal. And he was legit shoot angry about this. So then they have this, they do this angle where Rob would go to the WWF and work a couple of matches and basically portray a sellout to the ECW audience. If you remember this angle, this was where Rob Van Dam got named Mr. Monday Night. So this is the Mr. Monday Night era of Rob Van Dam in ECW. And basically he would go to the WWF, cut these promos that were talking about how ECW was low talent and low budget and those guys sucked and they were wasting his time and all that kind of stuff. But then he would go to ECW and, you know, kind of be on, not really be on their side because they hate him, but, you know, just kind of to rub it in their face that he works on Mondays. And Vince basically was like, you know, we were interested in bringing in Rob at the time. And they had already been subsidizing ECW. And on occasion, Paul would lend them talent or they would lend Paul talent. But they were interested in signing Rob, but Rob didn't want to stay. You know, Rob liked ECW. He liked the loose nature of it. The more, you know, he can indulge his creativity in ECW. He didn't want to be in the WWE. He didn't want to be in WCW. But Vince McMahon being in this documentary was so awesome because I did not know the kind of relationship he had with Rob. He loves Rob Van Dam. And that made me smile. That was excellent stuff, man. Because you got Vince was in here in this documentary more than I ever expected him to. Giving Rob all these crazy compliments. Like he was talking about how, you know, Rob was like a centerpiece, somebody that he really wanted to bring to WWF because he knew they were changing the style. And he said, like, when we changed our style, you know, we thought that if he could use his athleticism and his ability, but not with the Wild West nature of ECW, but in a more logical, structured, organization, he could have been a big star for us, but he just didn't want to do it. So that was sort of, you know, the weirdness. And of course they did the television title run when he became Mr. Pay-Per-View and the whole fucking show and all that kind of stuff. We're going to skip over all that. So then, of course, he talked about breaking his ankle in 2000. And this was the first real injury he had ever had. He had, you know, some minor injuries up to this point, but nothing that would prevent him from wrestling. And, you know, Paul said this has become Rob Van Dam's style. Was high flying, but it wasn't pretty. Like usually luchadors would have a more flourish based style. He said like Rob Van Dam, all of his high flying stuff was meant to hurt. So you had to, like, and, you know, they would show the Van Daminator or the Van Terminator and, or, you know, him doing dives into the crowd. And he was talking about how innovative he was. Like there was all kinds of guys. There was, of course, there was like the Dudleys and Tommy Dreamer was in it. And Sabu, all the ECW guys they usually get, except Raven and, you know, Shane Douglas and Taz. But they was in this thing, and it was great. You know, it was. But they talked about the ECW, the decline of ECW, and basically we're talking about, hey, at this point, you know, ECW's gradual decline actually helped them because they got to come to grips with it ending. Rather than it being a snap your fingers, the company's there today, it's gone tomorrow. Everybody knew it was going to close as it was going out of business. So a lot of people who were there for a while was kind of prepared. And Paul talked about how, you know, he owed Rob so much money. I think he owed Rob like $150,000. And Paul says, and I don't know how true this is, that Rob would work without being paid. And that sometimes, you know, he would just say, don't pay me. Or he would get money, but he wouldn't cash the checks. And So he considered Rob to be an investor in ECW. So I'm guessing that's why Rob's name is on the bankruptcy thing. I think it's on there because the checks were bouncing. I remember there was another documentary where Rob talked about the checks bouncing. But that was sure something. You know, that was sure something. That was a weird time. 150 racks. That's how much Paul owed Rob Van Dam. 150 racks. That's nuts. So, of course, he talked about his run in WWF. Now, the important thing here is the Brian Gerwitz piece. Because Brian Gerwitz was the writer for the time. So, basically, he says that there was a lot of feeling in the WWF locker room that Rob Van Dam didn't care. That his promo style, because it wasn't passionate or it wasn't intense, that he was very laid back, that he didn't care. And that's why, he kind of shrunk his opportunities. Because there was people saying that he didn't have passion. And then there was people saying he does have passion. He just brings it out differently. And this is a very interesting debate or very interesting argument to have. Because what is that? Like, how do you express yourself, express your passion in some ways and versus other ways? Or in ways that they want you to, but not in ways that feel weird to you. So this is where, Rob Van Dam became like the stoner character, like nobody gets higher than RVD. And people was kind of like, oh my God, he is so, just kind of dead inside. But, Gerwitz was basically saying like that was the political game. There was a lot of people who thought that he just wasn't giving a shit, or he just lacked passion for the business or whatever. And that hurt him. That he came across as a regular guy in a land where WWE wanted you to be a fired up, intense babyface. A Stone Cold Steve Austin, a Rock, even a Shawn Michaels to a degree, a Bret Hart. Rob just didn't have that in him. He just didn't have that character in him. He was too cool. And that limited his opportunities. So Edge was in the documentary and said that, hey, our fans got it. Like, the people got it. Rob Van Dam was one of the most over guys on the roster. You would hear people erupt when his music plays. And he says, and it wasn't just ECW fans. And I think this is a very important thing. Because he says it was in places that ECW never ran, Rob was like super over. So it wasn't just like, New York and Philadelphia. It would be like all over the place where they really would love Rob Van Dam. He said people got him. People understood him. And it was hard to explain why he wasn't getting these opportunities. But it took 20 fucking years for somebody to say it. But that's really what it was what Gerwitz was saying. Is like, this is political back and forth about, his passion and his ability to perform verbally. And then Rob would also say like he felt he was happy being over. And he was happy with his position, or he was fine with his position. And he just felt like somebody was in his ear all the time trying to change him. And he, of course, was being stubborn. He wants to be an individual. They started doing the whole one-of-a-kind thing. He didn't want to change. He wanted to grow from his position, but he just didn't want to change. He wanted to still be himself. And then he was the mastermind behind the original ECW One Night Stand. And they talked a lot about that. The ECW One Night Stand and how it gave a lot of people closure. It was basically like an ECW reunion show, obviously. But how he was upset that he had gotten injured before the show and he never really got a chance to perform, so he got to cut a promo. And basically he said that was the best promo he had ever cut because it was intense. It was the way WWE wants him to cut promos. But he didn't feel it because, the material they was giving him. But in this situation, he got to speak from the heart. So he got to say what he felt. And therefore, what they wanted from him came out. Which is really, that's like the most obvious thing in the world is you give the guy something that he wants to talk about. And he manages to find the passion that you say he lacks. So Vince comes back and he talks about how Rob's confidence increased after One Night Stand. That not only was it a lucrative venture, but he felt like Rob had changed as a performer, that he had found his voice, his in-ring stuff was better, his mic work was better, and that kind of led him to being Mr. Money in the Bank. And Rob had said, basically, I've been around for so long at this point, I didn't buy into anything anybody said to me until I actually literally won the Money in the Bank. And then he was like, whoa, this might actually happen. And this was where One Night Stand 2 came out. And then Paul was like, you know, the second idea, the second One Night Stand, it felt exploitative. Like we were kind of like exploiting ECW now and asking the fans to come back for another reunion. And then he says that he was okay with it because they were going to finally do something that the original ECW fans never got. And that is Rob Van Dam wrestling for a world title in the ECW arena. And that was the draw as far as, you know, how Heyman explains it. Like, it never happened before. So now this is something new. And it worked, obviously. You know, Rob wins the title. He gets given the ECW title. He's going to be the centerpiece of the ECW brand. Everything is coming up roses. And then Rob gets arrested. They showed the clip of Rob and Sabu getting arrested. And they showed Vince's reaction. Well, you know, Vince talked about it and basically said that he was disappointed in Rob. And that, you know, he thought Rob was better than that. He's like, I held Rob in a higher esteem. I thought he could do, you know, I thought he was above that kind of thing. And Rob has done interviews before where he basically said, like, Vince was cool about it, but, you know, he knew he had to get punished. That's why he took the belts from him, suspended him for 30 days or whatever. And basically after that, his push was essentially over. And I really liked, like I said before, I believe, on some video about Rob Van Dam, it was a beautiful thing how he took full responsibility for all of that. And he was basically like, look, there were people who didn't want ECW to exist. But I gave them, you know, everybody who was against me, I proved them right. You know, when they gave me the ball, I dropped it. He went his entire career without getting arrested. Then as soon as he gets the title, he feels like, you know, I'm Mr. Invincible. Nobody can fuck with me now. I broke through the glass ceiling and no, you know, he gets arrested and it all comes crashing down. And ECW fell apart because, you know, the whole Big Show thing was never supposed to happen. You know, like all of that shit wasn't supposed to happen. And so, you know, because Rob was taken out and Sabu was taken out, it just became a regular WWE product. It didn't get to be ECW anymore. And of course it flopped, you know. But I'm glad that Rob over the years, you know, started taking responsibility, not, you know, for the entire collapse of the entire ECW brand. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is he knew he was the centerpiece of that brand going forward. So anything that was going to happen, even when he eventually lost the WWE title, he was probably still going to be ECW champion. But, you know, when he took himself out of the box and put himself in the doghouse, now they have to scramble and try to reconfigure the entire, the plans that they may have had for the thing. And the two biggest stars were Sabu and Rob Van Dam, and both of these guys are suspended. So what are you going to do? And I think Kurt Angle wanted to leave. Kurt Angle didn't even want to be on ECW. Now, if Kurt was willing to stay, maybe things would have been better. But Kurt left. Sabu got, they didn't even mention Kurt leaving. But that's something to think about because Kurt Angle was supposed to be in this ECW brand. He left. He would rather go to TNA. So he took off. And then Sabu and Rob Van Dam got arrested. You know, you had a dearth of marketable guys on that brand now. So what do? You go with Big Show, which was a huge fucking mistake for obvious reasons. It was a huge mistake. So he knew he was done. So when he came back, it was never the same. His push was never going to be the same again. And so he felt like, hey, I ran my course. I did everything I could do. 2007, he figured it was time to go. So he left. He started, you know, and he said that I was still wrestling, but I had kept my price artificially high so that I wouldn't have to work all the time, you know, and I could get paid one time and not have to travel as much. And then he talked about his various WWE returns, about how, you know, well, he even mentioned TNA, going to TNA for a little while. But he said 2013 was really good, but when it was over, it was over. In 2014, it was trash. He didn't like that. because he was like, hey, I have been in the business for 30 years. The passion argument came up again. He was like, at this point, I didn't have no problem telling all of these young guys, you guys definitely have more passion for the business than I do. I've been in the business too long to still be as passionate and reckless as all you guys were. I just didn't have it in 2014. And I respect that too. Like Rob was one of those guys, he just got so much cooler as in, when he grew up. Like when he was younger doing the RF videos and stuff like that, he's still kind of a dickhead. But now he's kind of like the cool uncle. So he's like, look, it is what it is. And Sean kind of had to hit that thing too, the similarities between these two guys are like tremendous. It's tremendous stuff. But Rob kind of hit a point in his life, and he said it was 2016 when he had the darkest time in his life, because that's when he got divorced. Because he had been married since the 90s. And, he finally got divorced, and the house was empty. He didn't have any kids. He didn't know what to do with himself. Like, he was lost. And then he found Katie, and she reinvigorated him and brought, like, new energy and fresh energy into his life. And, he became, an entrepreneur doing the CBD oils. And they even showed, he got the surprise for the Hall of Fame. But the crazy thing is he brought Vince McMahon some rolling papers. At the Hall of Fame, he said, like, come bearing gifts. And he gives Vince is like, what is this? And he opens it up and he's like, it's rolling papers. And this is like, what in the hell? So, that's kind of where we end. We end with Rob Van Dam's Hall of Fame speech. Triple H and Vince talking about how he revolutionized the business and he was an innovator. He changed the style of the business. And, that was great stuff, man. This was a fantastic documentary. It was awesome. And it was nice that, a lot of people, they was able to recognize the entire breadth of Rob Van Dam's career and brought in a lot of people like his mom and Katie. Katie talked for a little bit, and, Kit Likens and, Sabu and, the guys who knew him, and it felt real. It felt organic. It felt real. Nobody felt like they were blowing smoke up Rob's ass. It felt like they were talking, especially about Vince. Vince, again, I'm never going to talk about it enough. Vince loves Rob Van Dam. He seemed to be one of Rob's biggest supporters, which begs the question, how powerful was these other guys who were in Vince's ear? Like, don't push him, don't do it, But we already know one of those guys at least got his throat crushed by Rob Van Dam in an Elimination Chamber. But, you ain't hear that from me. In any event, the Rob Van Dam documentary was tremendous. It's well worth the hour and 20 minutes or whatever it is that it takes to watch it. You're going to get you're going to get some good stories out of it. You're going to get everything that you need if you're a big fan of Rob Van Dam, which I am. So, let me know what you guys think. Like, share, subscribe, tell people, write a billboard if you can. Help this channel grow. Send cash via the Cash App or subscribe star, whichever one you feel comfortable doing. And, thank you guys for your time. And I'll talk to you guys later, man.